"Stop! I'll buy them!" the weathered mountain man bellows, eyes locked on three black sisters hanging upside down in the dusty saloon, their star-shaped birthmark gleaming, the same mark that once saved his life. The jeering crowd sees only cursed oddities, three performers destined for a lifetime of servitude under whoever claims them. They mock the sisters' shared birthmark, calling it the devil's sign. Their fate seems sealed, entertainment slaves until they break. But the desperate mountain man recognizes something the crowd cannot. That birthmark connects to a 15-year-old secret involving murder, stolen fortunes, and his quest for redemption. The sisters hold the key to a legacy worth killing for, though they don't know it yet. Will they discover their true identity before those who destroyed their family return to finish what they started? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The rope bit into Azara's ankles as she swung upside down, her long braids brushing the saloon's dusty floor. Her sisters dangled beside her, 17-year-old Adele trying to stay calm, while 15-year-old Tamsin whimpered softly. The crowd of miners and cowboys laughed at their predicament, pointing at the distinctive star-shaped birthmarks on each sister's shoulder. "Look at them devil marks," one man cackled. "All three got the same curse." Azara had protected her sisters for 4 years, ever since they'd escaped the traveling show that treated them like animals. They'd survived by performing acrobatic acts in saloons, their unusual birthmarks drawing crowds who paid to gawk. But 3 days ago, Sheriff Tilton had cornered them in Silver Creek, claiming they were escaped property. "Auction starts now," Tilton announced, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "These three make fine entertainment, strong backs, good for work, too." The bidding began low. $5, $10, $15. Men shouted crude suggestions about what they'd do with three sisters. Azara's stomach churned, but she kept her face defiant. She'd endured worse humiliation. The important thing was keeping Idel and Tamsin safe. $20 for all three, called a rancher in worn leather. $25, countered a saloon owner with gold teeth. Azara had learned to read years ago, trading performances for lessons from a kind schoolmarm. She taught herself numbers by carefully tracking their meager earnings. These skills had kept them alive, but now they seemed worthless. No amount of cleverness could free them from these ropes. Sheriff Tilton grinned as the price climbed. $30 from the gentleman in the corner. In the back of the crowd, a weathered man in a dusty coat shifted nervously. His eyes weren't on the sisters' faces like the other men. Instead, he stared intently at their exposed shoulders, at those star-shaped marks that had made them outcasts their entire lives. Solomon Cray's heart hammered against his ribs. 15 years. 15 years of searching, following rumors and whispers across 3 territories. Those birthmarks were unmistakable, the same ones he'd seen on the tiny babies he'd failed to save the night their parents died. $35, someone shouted. The sisters would disappear again if he didn't act. Sold to men who saw them as property, as entertainment. He'd spent every cent he had gathering evidence, collecting documents, preparing for this moment. His life savings sat heavy in his coat pocket. $40, the saloon owner called out. Solomon's hands trembled. Thomas Blackwater had been his best friend, his business partner. The night Thomas and his wife were murdered, Solomon had arrived too late to save them. He'd searched the burned house desperately, finding no trace of the 3 baby girls. For 15 years, he'd blamed himself. $45, came another bid. The eldest sister, hanging closest to him, caught his eye. Even upside down, even terrified, she radiated fierce determination. She was protecting the younger ones just like her father would have done, just like Thomas had tried to do the night he died. "Going once at 45, Sheriff Tilton announced. Solomon thought of the papers hidden in his saddlebags. Birth certificates, property deeds, witness statements. Everything needed to prove these girls were the rightful heirs to the Blackwater mining fortune. But first, he had to save them. Going twice. The crowd pressed closer, eager to see who'd claim the 3 sisters. Some men already discussed what kind of work they'd force them to do. Others made suggestions that turned Solomon's stomach. Clayton Morse had stolen everything from the Blackwater family, their mines, their land, their lives. He'd grown rich selling silver that belonged to these three girls, thinking he'd eliminated all threats to his empire. But Morse hadn't counted on Solomon's guilt, driving him to spend 15 years gathering proof. Sheriff Tilton raised his gavel. The crowd fell silent. These weren't just three performers hanging upside down. They were the daughters of his murdered friend, the rightful owners of half the silver mines in the territory. Their birthmarks weren't curses or devil signs. They were family crests, proof of identity that Morse would kill to suppress. Solomon reached for his life savings. Everything he owned wouldn't be enough to give them the life they deserved, but it might buy them time. Time to learn the truth about their parents. Time to reclaim their inheritance. Time to bring their parents' killers to justice. The gavel began its downward arc. "Stop!" Solomon's voice boomed across the saloon. Every head turned toward him as he pushed through the crowd. "I'll buy them!" He pulled out a worn leather pouch, his life's work reduced to crumpled bills and silver coins. $100 for all three. Gasps echoed through the room. Men stepped back, shocked by the enormous sum. Sheriff Tilton's eyes widened with greed. $100, Tilton repeated, going once. No one else bid. The amount was staggering, more than most men earned in 6 months. Solomon's hands shook as he counted out the money, everything he'd saved while searching for Thomas Blackwater's lost daughters. Sold to the mountain man. The crowd dispersed, disappointed by the quick end to their entertainment. Solomon moved to untie the sisters, his heart pounding. They stared at him with fear and suspicion, having no idea their lives had just changed forever. He'd found them at last. Now came the harder part, convincing them to trust him long enough to reclaim their stolen birthright. The wagon wheels creaked across the dusty trail as Solomon drove his 3 passengers toward Eagle's Canyon. Azara sat rigid beside him, her sisters huddled close behind them. She'd insisted on sitting where she could watch his hands, ready to grab the reins if needed. "Where are you taking us?" Azara's voice carried the authority of someone used to making life-or-death decisions. "My ranch. You'll be safe there." Safe. The word meant nothing to her anymore. She'd heard it from the traveling show owner who locked them in cages, from the saloon keeper who promised food in exchange for performances, then tried to take more. Safety was something she created for her sisters, not something men offered. Solomon reached into his coat pocket. Azara tensed, ready to fight. Instead, he pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age. "Your father's name was Thomas Blackwater," he said quietly. The sisters exchanged glances. They'd grown up with no family name, no history beyond what they'd lived. Performers didn't need surnames. "Thomas owned 3 silver mines and 2,000 acres of land," Solomon continued. "He was my business partner, my friend." Edel leaned forward, her artistic eye studying Solomon's weathered face. Years of reading crowds had taught her to spot lies. She saw pain there, and something else. Guilt. "If he was rich, why were we performing in saloons?" Tamsin asked. Her mathematical mind always found the inconsistencies. Solomon's jaw tightened. "Because someone killed him and your mother 15 years ago, made it look like an accident, then sold you 3 to get rid of the evidence." The wagon hit a rut, jolting them all. Azara grabbed the side rail, her birthmark visible on her shoulder. Solomon had stared at that mark in the saloon like he'd seen a ghost. "That star on your shoulders," he said. "It's the Blackwater family crest. Your grandfather had it carved into the main support beam of his first mine. Your father wore it on a ring." Azara touched her birthmark instinctively. She'd always wondered why all 3 sisters bore identical marks. The traveling show had called them freaks of nature, proof they belonged together in captivity. "You're saying we're rich?" Tamsin's voice cracked with disbelief. "Richer than anyone in 3 territories," Solomon replied. "If we can prove who you are and stay alive long enough to claim it." The ranch appeared as they crested a hill. Not the ramshackle cabin Azara had expected, but a well-maintained house with a barn and corrals. Horses grazed in fenced pastures. Someone had built this place to last. Solomon helped them down from the wagon. Azara stepped away quickly, maintaining distance. Trust came slowly when survival depended on reading people correctly. Inside the house, Solomon lit an oil lamp and opened a wooden chest. Documents spilled out. Birth certificates, property deeds, mining claims, witness statements. 15 years of careful collection. "These are your birth papers," he said, spreading them on the table. Born in Silverbrook Hospital. Azara Marie Blackwater, Idell Grace Blackwater, Tamsin Hope Blackwater. Azara stared at the documents. She'd taught herself to read by trading performances for lessons, letter by letter. The names swam before her eyes, foreign yet somehow familiar. "The night your parents died, I was supposed to meet your father at the house," Solomon continued. "When I arrived, the place was burning. I searched everywhere for you three, but found nothing. Thought you died in the fire." Idell picked up a small daguerreotype from the chest, a woman with kind eyes holding 3 babies, each marked with the star-shaped birthmark. Their mother. "Clayton Morse killed them." Solomon's voice turned hard. He wanted the mines. Figured 3 babies would be easy to eliminate. Instead, someone sold you to the traveling show. Tamsin studied the birth certificates with her sharp mathematical eye. Everything added up. Dates, locations, official seals. But numbers could be forged. "How do we know you're not lying?" Azara asked. Solomon pulled out a worn leather journal. "Your father wrote about you every day. Azara walked first, at 10 months. Idell could hum melodies before she could talk. Tamsin counted her fingers obsessively. The details hit like physical blows. Azara still walked with quick, confident steps. Idell hummed while she worked. Tamsin counted everything, a nervous habit that helped her think. "Morse has been operating your mines for 15 years, Solomon said. "Getting rich off silver that belongs to you. Sheriff Tilton works for him. That's why he captured you. Brought you here. But you bid on us," Idell pointed out, "because I recognized the birthmarks. I've been searching every territory, following rumors of 3 sisters with matching marks." Azara's mind raced, processing information like she'd learned to read contracts and performance agreements. The story made sense, but accepting it meant believing their entire lives had been built on theft and murder. "If we're really the Blackwater heirs," she said slowly, "what happens next?" Solomon's expression darkened. "Morse finds out you're alive. He'll finish what he started 15 years ago. But if we can gather enough legal proof, expose him publicly, we might see justice." "Might," Tamsin repeated. "The alternative is running forever," Solomon said. "Living as performers, always looking over your shoulders." Azara looked at her sisters. Idell's artistic hands traced their mother's photograph. Tamsin studied numbers that proved their inheritance. Both waited for her decision, as they always had. She'd kept them alive for 4 years through wit and determination. Now she faced a choice that could free them forever or get them killed. "Show us everything," she said finally. "Every document, every piece of proof. If we're going to fight for this, we need to understand what we're up against." Solomon nodded and began spreading more papers across the table. Outside, shadows lengthened as the sun set over Eagles Canyon, and somewhere in the distance, riders watched the ranch with hostile eyes. Dawn broke over Eagles Canyon as Azara studied the mining contracts spread across Solomon's kitchen table. The legal language that had once seemed impossible now made perfect sense. Years of negotiating performance fees and reading venue agreements had prepared her mind for this moment. "These numbers don't match," she said, pointing to discrepancies in Morse's reports. Her finger traced production figures that jumped impossibly from month to month. "He's been skimming profits and hiding the real output." Tamsin looked up from her own stack of papers. Her mathematical genius, honed by years of carefully tracking their meager earnings to survive, had uncovered a pattern. The Silverbrook mine alone should generate $3,000 monthly. Morse is only reporting $800. Idelle sat by the window, sketching portraits of townspeople who might serve as witnesses. Her artistic talents had developed through years of entertaining saloon crowds, reading faces and emotions to gauge which performances would earn the most coins. Now those same skills helped her identify who could be trusted. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store remembers our parents," Idelle said, adding details to her sketch. "She said they were kind people who always paid fair wages. She'd testify for us." Solomon entered carrying a leather satchel filled with more documents. "Found these hidden in your father's old office. Morse missed them when he ransacked the place." Azara opened the first folder and found detailed maps of mine shafts, marked in her father's careful handwriting. Her natural business instincts, the same ones that had kept three sisters alive on the frontier, immediately grasped the implications. "He marked every silver vein," she breathed. "Morse doesn't know about the eastern tunnels. Those could be worth $50,000, Tamsin calculated quickly. The front door burst open. Sheriff Tilton stood in the doorway, hand resting on his gun belt. 3 deputies flanked him, their faces grim with purpose. "You're harboring stolen property," Tilton announced. "Those girls belong to the state as unclaimed assets." Azara rose slowly, her performer's poise masking the fear coursing through her. Years of facing hostile crowds had taught her to project confidence even when terrified. "We're not property," she said evenly. "We're citizens with legal documentation." Tilton's eyes narrowed. "Papers can be forged." Solomon stepped forward, but Azara held up a hand. This was her fight now. She'd spent 4 years protecting her sisters through words and wit. Time to use those skills. "Deputy Carson," she addressed the youngest lawman directly. "You were raised in Silverbrook, weren't you?" Carson shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you remember the Blackwater family, the mine owners who built the church and school." Carson's face flickered with recognition, but Tilton cut him off. "Ancient history. These girls are criminals." "Show him the birthmarks," Idelle said quietly. Azara hesitated, then pulled down her collar to reveal the star-shaped mark on her shoulder. Her sisters did the same. Carson's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Lord Almighty," Carson whispered. "You're Thomas Blackwater's daughters." "Shut your mouth," Tilton snapped. "We're taking them back to town." But Carson had drawn his weapon, pointing it at Tilton instead of the sisters. "Sheriff, if these ladies are who they claim to be, we got a problem, a big one." Tilton's face reddened with rage. "You're making a mistake, boy." "Maybe," Carson said. "But I remember Thomas Blackwater, good man who paid my daddy fair wages at the mine. If his daughters are alive, they got rights." The other 2 deputies looked uncertain. Azara recognized the moment of wavering authority from countless saloon confrontations. Time to press the advantage. "Deputy Carson, we have witness statements, birth certificates, and property deeds," she said calmly. "All we want is a fair legal hearing." Carson nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable." Tilton's hand moved toward his gun, but Carson was faster. "Don't even think about it, Sheriff. 3 deputies against 1. Those aren't good odds." Realizing he was outnumbered, Tilton backed toward the door. "This isn't over. Morse will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Azara replied. After the lawman left, Solomon stared at the sisters with newfound respect. "How did you know Carson would help?" "Idelle sketched him yesterday," Azara explained. She noticed he kept looking at the old Blackwater Mining Company sign. His face showed recognition, not hostility. Idelle's artistic eye had detected micro-expressions that revealed Carson's true feelings. Years of reading saloon crowds had made her expert at spotting allies among enemies. "We need to move fast," Solomon said. "Tilton will warn Morse. They'll try something desperate." Tamsin spread out her calculations across the table. "If we can prove Morse has been stealing from the mines for 15 years, the territory courts will have to act. The evidence is overwhelming." "Evidence doesn't matter if we're dead," Solomon pointed out grimly. Azara studied the documents with fresh determination. Her business acumen, sharpened by years of survival, had found their path to victory. "Then we make this public. Morse can't kill us if the whole territory is watching. She turned to her sisters. Idell's people skills could rally community support. Tamsin's mathematical proof could expose the financial fraud. Together, their talents could bring down the man who'd stolen their lives. "We're not running anymore," Azara declared. "It's time to take back what belongs to us." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains as news of the Blackwater sisters spread through Eagle's Canyon. In his mansion, Clayton Morse received word that his 15-year secret had been exposed and began planning his response. The sound of hoofbeats thundered across Eagle's Canyon as 6 riders approached Solomon's ranch. Azara looked up from the legal documents she'd been studying, her performer's instincts immediately recognizing danger. Years of reading hostile saloon crowds had taught her to sense violence before it erupted. "Company coming," she announced quietly. Solomon grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace while the sisters moved away from the windows. Through the glass, they could see Clayton Morse himself leading the group, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with his hired gunman's rough clothing. "Thomas Blackwater's brats," Morse called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Thought you were dead and buried." Azara stepped onto the porch, her sisters flanking her. 15 years of survival had taught her that showing fear invited attack. She stood tall, projecting the same confidence she'd used to negotiate with difficult venue owners. "Mr. Morse," she replied evenly, "we need to discuss the return of our family's mining operations." Morse laughed, but his eyes held deadly intent. "Your family died in that fire. Everyone knows it. These are just 3 performers trying to steal what doesn't belong to them." "The birth certificates say otherwise," Idell said, her artistic eye studying Morse's face for tells. She recognized the micro-expressions of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. "Papers can be burned," Morse replied, "just like houses." The threat hung heavy in the air. Tamsin's mathematical mind quickly calculated their odds. 6 armed men against Solomon's single rifle. The numbers weren't favorable, but Azara had faced worse odds in saloon fights and traveling show confrontations. She'd learned that bullies often backed down when their authority was challenged publicly. "Deputy Carson seemed very interested in our documentation," she said loudly. "Strange how news travels fast in small territories." Morse's confident expression flickered. He hadn't expected word to spread so quickly about the sisters' return. "Carson's a fool," Morse snapped. "Tilton will handle him." Tilton seemed less confident when 3 of his own deputies turned on him, Solomon interjected from the doorway. The hired gunmen shifted nervously. They'd signed up to intimidate helpless performers, not fight law enforcement. Azara recognized their hesitation and pressed the advantage. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store remembers our parents," she announced. "So does half the town. By now, everyone knows the Blackwater daughters survived." Morse's face reddened with rage. 15 years of carefully constructed lies were crumbling in a single day. He'd built his fortune on the assumption that 3 baby girls had perished in the fire he'd set. "Mount up," he ordered his men. "We're leaving." But his eyes promised this wasn't over. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Solomon lowered his rifle with visible relief. "He'll be back with more men," Solomon warned. "Then we can't stay here," Azara decided quickly. Her survival instincts, honed by years of dangerous situations, told her they needed to move. Within an hour, they'd packed the essential documents and abandoned the ranch. Solomon led them through mountain trails he'd traveled for 15 years while searching for the sisters. The same paths that had helped him evade Morse's men before would serve them again. They found refuge in the cabin of Jake Morrison, an old prospector who'd worked for Thomas Blackwater years earlier. Morrison's weathered face lit up with recognition when he saw the sisters' birthmarks. "Lord have mercy," Morrison breathed. "Thomas's girls, alive and grown." His cabin was small but defensible, tucked into a canyon with only one approach. Morrison had chosen the location specifically to avoid trouble, and now it served as the perfect hideout. "Morse has been bleeding your minds dry," Morrison told them as they settled in. "Taking silver and claiming the veins are nearly empty. But I know those tunnels. They're rich as ever." Tamsin's mathematical mind immediately grasped the implications. He's been selling our silver and pocketing the profits while reporting the mines as barely profitable. For 15 years, Morrison confirmed. Must be hundreds of thousands of dollars by now. Azara studied the legal documents by lamplight, her business acumen revealing the scope of Morse's theft. Her ability to read contracts, learned through years of negotiating performance agreements, showed her exactly how he'd manipulated the records. He's been selling to buyers in Denver and San Francisco, she discovered, using false shipping manifests to hide the real quantities. Idell sketched maps of the territory, marking locations where Morrison said sympathetic witnesses lived. Her artistic talents, combined with her skill at reading people's emotions, helped identify potential allies. There's a circuit judge coming through Silverbrook next week, Morrison mentioned. Judge Webster. Honest man who knew your father. Perfect, Azara said. We need a public legal hearing where Morse can't intimidate witnesses. But first they needed to survive long enough to reach Silverbrook. Morrison had spotted riders searching the mountain trails, clearly looking for their hiding place. They'll find us eventually, Solomon admitted grimly. Morse has too many men. Azara looked at her sisters, seeing the same determination she felt reflected in their faces. They'd survived 4 years of hardship through combined talents. Adele's ability to win people's trust, Tamsin's genius for numbers and details, her own natural leadership skills. Then we don't wait for them to find us, she declared. We go to Silverbrook tomorrow and force this confrontation on our terms. The decision made, they spent the night preparing their case. Documents organized, witness statements prepared, legal arguments refined. By dawn, they were ready to reclaim their birthright or die trying. Morrison loaded his shotgun as the first light crept over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, Morse's riders continued their search, unaware their quarry was about to become the hunters. The town of Silverbrook buzzed with excitement as news spread that Judge Webster would hold court in the morning. Azara sat in the hotel room, organizing their evidence one final time. Her business acumen, sharpened by years of survival, told her they had a strong case, but strong cases meant nothing if key witnesses disappeared. Mrs. Henderson agreed to testify, Idell reported, returning from her rounds through town. Her artistic eye had read the storekeeper's genuine desire for justice. So did 3 former miners who worked the Blackwater claims. Tamsin looked up from her calculations. I've documented every discrepancy in Morse's financial reports. 15 years of theft totaling over $200,000. Solomon paced by the window, watching for Morse's men. Too many people know you're here. Morse will try something before the hearing. As if summoned by his words, Deputy Carson appeared at their door. His young face showed deep concern mixed with determination. Judge Webster wants to see you privately, Carson said, before the public hearing tomorrow. They followed Carson to the judge's chambers, where an elderly man with steel-gray hair reviewed their documents. Judge Webster had known their father personally, and his weathered hands trembled slightly as he examined the birth certificates. I presided over your parents' estate after the fire, he said quietly. Always wondered what happened to you girls. The official report said no survivors. Someone wanted us to disappear, Azara replied. Webster's sharp eyes studied their matching birthmarks. These are authentic. I remember your mother showing them to my wife, calling them her 3 little stars. But as they prepared to leave, Webster pulled Solomon aside. His voice dropped to a worried whisper that the sisters could barely hear. Be careful tonight, Webster warned. Morse has been asking about my travel schedule for weeks. This hearing wasn't as spontaneous as it seems. The implication hit like a physical blow. Morse had somehow orchestrated Webster's arrival, which meant he'd been planning this confrontation for longer than they'd realized. Back at the hotel, Solomon revealed the judge's warning. It's a trap, he concluded grimly. Morse wants us all in one place. Then why go through with a legal hearing? Tamsin asked, her mathematical mind seeking logic in the situation. Solomon's expression darkened with a truth he'd been avoiding. Because he needs to discredit us publicly before eliminating us. If we just disappear, people will ask questions. But if we're exposed as frauds first, we're not frauds, Azara said firmly. I know that. You know that. But Morse has been building his version of the story for 15 years. The weight of Solomon's guilt became suddenly clear to all three sisters. He wasn't just their protector or their father's former partner. He was a man carrying a terrible secret about the night their parents died. You were there, Idel said quietly, her artistic intuition reading the pain in his weathered features. The night they were killed. Solomon's shoulders sagged with 15 years of carried burden. I was supposed to meet your father at 8 o'clock, business emergency, he said. But I was delayed helping a neighbor with a sick horse. The sisters listened in tense silence as Solomon's carefully guarded truth finally emerged. When I arrived, the house was already burning. I could hear screaming inside. I tried to get through the flames, but... His voice broke with remembered anguish. You tried to save them, Azara said with sudden understanding. I failed. I got there 10 minutes too late. Found your father's body near the front door, your mother's near the back bedroom where the nursery was. But no sign of you three. Tamsin's analytical mind processed the timeline. If you'd arrived on time, you would have died with them. Maybe. Or maybe I could have stopped it. The revelation recontextualized everything. Solomon's desperate 15-year search hadn't been driven by loyalty alone, but by crushing survivors' guilt. His need to protect them came from his failure to protect their parents. That's why you recognized our birthmarks so quickly, Idel realized. You've been looking for them your entire adult life. Every day, Solomon confirmed, every territory, every town, following rumors of three sisters with matching marks. Azara felt a strange sense of completion. The missing piece of their family's tragedy had finally clicked into place. Solomon wasn't just an ally or surrogate father figure. He was the witness to their parents' murder, the man whose testimony could finally bring justice. Morse doesn't know you survived that night, she said with growing excitement. He thinks I died in a mining accident 2 years later. I let him believe it while I searched for you. The strategic implications were enormous. They possessed not just financial evidence of Morse's theft, but an eyewitness to the original murders. Solomon's testimony could expose the entire conspiracy, but first they had to survive the night. As darkness fell over Silverbrook, lanterns appeared on the hills surrounding the town. Morse's men were positioning themselves for whatever he had planned. The sisters and Solomon barricaded themselves in their hotel room, taking shifts, watching the street below. Whatever happens tomorrow, Azara told Solomon, we face it together. No more guilt, no more running. Solomon nodded, his weathered face showing the first peace he'd known in 15 years. The girls he'd failed to save as babies had grown into women capable of fighting their own battles. Outside their window, Silverbrook settled into an uneasy quiet. Judge Webster's court would convene in 6 hours, and with it, the final confrontation between the Blackwater sisters and the man who'd stolen their lives. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. The Silverbrook courthouse filled to capacity as Judge Webster called the session to order. Every seat was taken, with townspeople standing along the walls. Word had spread overnight that the Blackwater daughters had returned to claim their inheritance. Clayton Morse sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit immaculate, but sweat beaded on his forehead. This hearing will determine the rightful ownership of the Blackwater mining claims, Webster announced. The plaintiffs will present their evidence first. Azara rose, her natural leadership commanding the room's attention. Years of performing had taught her to project confidence even when her heart raced with nervous energy. Your Honor, we are the daughters of Thomas and Mary Blackwater, presumed dead for 15 years but very much alive. She gestured to Idel, who stepped forward and rolled down her sleeve to reveal the star-shaped birthmark. Tamsin followed, then Azara herself. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the matching marks became visible. Mrs. Henderson stood from the gallery. I remember those marks. Mary Blackwater showed them to me when the girls were babies. Called them her 3 little stars. Other witnesses confirmed the birthmark's authenticity. The former miners who'd worked for Thomas Blackwater testified about the family crest carved into the main support beam of the original mine. Every detail Solomon had collected over 15 years painted an undeniable picture. "Birth certificates," Azara announced, presenting the documents to Judge Webster. Her business acumen had taught her to organize evidence logically, building an unshakable foundation. Tamsin approached the bench with her mathematical analysis. "Your Honor, these financial records show systematic theft from the Blackwater mines. Over 15 years, Mr. Morse has stolen approximately $230,000. She spread out charts and calculations that made the fraud impossible to deny. Production records that didn't match shipping manifests. Silver sales to distant buyers using false documentation, a web of financial deception that only her mathematical genius could have unraveled. Morse's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Webster examined each document with the careful attention of a man who'd known their father personally. "Mr. Morse," Webster said finally, "how do you explain these discrepancies?" Morse stood, his confidence still intact despite the mounting evidence. "Your Honor, these are 3 performers with forged documents. The real Blackwater children died 15 years ago in the fire that killed their parents." "Can you prove that claim?" "Everyone knows it. There were no survivors." "Actually," a voice called from the back of the courtroom, "there was one survivor." Solomon stepped forward, removing his hat. Several townspeople gasped with recognition. Clayton Morse's face went pale as he stared at a man he'd believed dead for over a decade. "Solomon Cray," Judge Webster said with surprise. "You were reported killed in a mining accident." "I let people believe that while I searched for Thomas's daughters," Solomon replied. "But I was there the night Thomas and Mary were murdered." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Morse's lawyer jumped to his feet with objections, but Webster silenced the room with his gavel. "Tell us what you witnessed, Mr. Cray." Solomon's weathered voice carried 15 years of guilt and determination. "I arrived at the Blackwater house to find it burning. Thomas had called an emergency meeting, but I was delayed. When I got there, I saw Clayton Morse riding away from the flames." "That's a lie," Morse shouted, his composure finally cracking. "I tried to save Thomas and Mary, but the fire was too intense. Found their bodies inside. Thomas had been shot before the fire started. So had Mary." Judge Webster's expression hardened. "You're testifying that this was murder, not an accidental fire." "Yes, Your Honor. Clayton Morse killed the Blackwater family to steal their mining claims. He thought he'd eliminated all the heirs." Morse's face twisted with rage. "You can't prove any of this. It's the word of a drifter against a respected businessman." But Deputy Carson stepped forward with new evidence. "Actually, we found this in Sheriff Tilton's safe this morning." He presented a document that made Morse's lawyer sink into his chair. It was a contract between Morse and Tilton, detailing payment for eliminating the Blackwater problem 15 years earlier. "Sheriff Tilton confessed this morning," Carson announced. "Said he helped stage the fire and arranged for the babies to be sold to a traveling show. He's been taking payments from Mr. Morse ever since." The courtroom fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Murder, theft, corruption, and 15 years of systematic fraud. Judge Webster examined the contract with visible disgust. "Mr. Morse," he said finally, "you are hereby charged with the murders of Thomas and Mary Blackwater, theft of mining properties, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Deputy Carson moved to arrest Morse, who suddenly looked like the old man he was beneath his expensive clothes. His empire of stolen wealth had crumbled in a single morning. "The Blackwater mining claims are hereby restored to their rightful owners," Webster announced. "Azara, Idell, and Tamsin Blackwater." The courtroom exploded with cheers. Townspeople who'd suffered under Morse's corruption for 15 years celebrated the return of justice. The sisters embraced Solomon, their surrogate father who'd never stopped searching for them. Over the following months, the Blackwater sisters transformed their inheritance into something greater than mere wealth. Azara used her business skills to improve mining conditions and worker safety. Adele established art programs and schools for disadvantaged children. Tamsin created financial services helping freed slaves and displaced families start new lives. Solomon found peace at last, serving as their advisor and the father figure they'd never had. His guilt had been replaced by pride watching three remarkable women reclaim not just their inheritance, but their purpose. The Blackwater Foundation became the most respected charitable organization in 3 territories, proof that dignity and justice could triumph over even the darkest corruption. And in the main office, carved into a wooden beam, the star-shaped family crest served as a reminder that some bonds could never be broken,